This is Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers. 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 182, entitled The Hypocrisy of Fluffie-Feminists. Description. This flyer emphasizes the hypocrisy of the fluffy feminists who want equal rights with men but reject equal obligations with men, that is, sharing equally the burden of earning the living. Most feminists are still fluffies in their expectations of men, seeing men as cash machines. The divorce courts have been taken over by the fluffy feminists and are now financially massacring roughly 1 in 4 married fathers, which is a massive injustice against men. This flyer maps out a political program to force women to be FIPs, that's financially independent persons, and to men fair, the verb, the gender laws. Now the flyer itself. The hypocrisy of fluffy feminists. A fluffy feminist is a woman who is both a feminist and a fluffy, with all the hypocrisy that implies, as this flyer will show. As a feminist, a woman expects to be given equal rights with men by society and by the law. For example, equal pay for equal work, equal access to careers and the professions for equal qualifications. The MARER, M-A-R-E-R, maternity rejection right, aka also known as abortion right, etc. As a fluffy, a woman expects men to pay for her to have babies, which was the traditional man-slave role of the male. The obvious hypocrisy here is that the fluffy feminists want equal rights with men, but not equal obligations with men, that is, sharing equally the burden of earning the living, and bothering to become career competent by studying majors that will lead to skills that the marketplace values and rewards with good salaries, so that women can afford to raise kids on their own if need be. The hypocrisy of fluffy feminists is that they want their cake and to eat it too. They want equal rights, but do not accept equal rights for men. That is, they expect men to keep paying for women to have babies. This hypocrisy manifests itself most clearly in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, where a divorcing father will be financially massacred by his fluffy or fluffy feminist ex-wife. He will lose his kids with 90% probability. He will lose his house, which goes to his fluffy ex-wife to raise her kids in. He will have to pay child support to kids he will see twice a month on weekends. And often he will have to pay alimony to his fluffy parasitic ex-wife for life, with no moral or legal obligations on her to get off her fat, lazy, immoral, parasitic ass and become a FIP. The financial massacring in Western countries is occurring at a frequency of roughly 1 in 4 married fathers, a massive gender injustice against men. So it's not surprising that in the major countries such as the US, Japan, Germany, etc., 2/3, so 70% of young men under 35 refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. They have rejected the traditional man-slave role of paying for a woman to sit on her fluffy ass and have a man-slave pay for her to stay at home and raise her kids. And then 10 years later, when she's bored with him, she takes him to the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court and financially massacres him so that she can parasite off his money. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists. They are the enemy of the masculists. The primary political goal of the masculists is to wipe out man-slavery by wiping out the fluffies and fluffy feminists, not by killing them, but simply ignoring them totally, not even pumping and dumping them, so that they rot on the shelf to extinction. You can make a historical analogy between the abolitionists of the 19th century in Northern America and the masculists today. The abolitionists wanted to stop Negro slavery. The masculists want to stop man slavery. Masculists see fluffies as Simon Legrees. in brackets, the brutal slave master in Stowe, that's Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. When President Lincoln met Stowe, he said to her, quote, "So here's the little woman who started this great war," referring to the US Civil War, in which 600,000 US soldiers died. Masculists see fluffies as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out by refusing to have anything to do with them. Men are nearly all FIPs because they're socialized that way and do not have much choice, since men do not have babies, at least not for another decade or so, when male genius will invent the artificial womb. Japanese scientists have already grown a goat in an artificial womb, so a human baby can't be far off. Since a fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can manage to get her financial claws into a manslave, we men have the power to wipe out fluffies, in capitals. Already 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. In a decade, it will probably be over 90%. As the MGTOW men going their own way, and masculist movements spread across the world, fluffies will be forced by men to become FIPs. Otherwise, they will remain manless, loveless, childless, and poor, which is what they deserve. Fluffies are the Simon Legrees of the 21st century, and equally hated by the masculists. Masculists differ from the MGTOWs, who are politically passive, simply walking away from marriage and paternity. In Japan, the Japanese MGTOWs, known as the herbivore men, grass eaters, refuse to even sex young women. They have existed for a decade or so longer than the MGTOWs in the West and are starting to impact the population size. In the past year or two, the Japanese population has fallen by 1 million. In 2 decades, when the baby boomers are dead, the Japanese population will have fallen from about 130 million to 80 million. If the current paternity rejection continues, in a century, there will be no more Japanese. Hence, the fluffy feminists, having made the divorce courts toxic to men, and hence have made marriage and paternity toxic to men, are indirectly genociders. The fluffy feminists are wiping out whole populations, and hence are hated by anyone of either sex who understands the problem. So, what to do on the part of the masculists? In brackets, since the MGTOWs are politically impotent by choice, the masculists tend to ignore them and not take them very seriously. The obvious first step is to educate the public about the massive gender injustice against men, especially in the divorce courts. Once men are educated on men's gender issues, men should get angry and harass and harangue the fluffies and fluffy feminists, putting enormous moral pressure on them to FIP up or be manless, and stop being such hypocrites. The P-A-R-E-R, that's paternity rejection right, needs to be brought in, which would allow a man to reject an unwanted pregnancy. He fills in a form rejecting paternity, so that if the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy, the full costs of the kid fall onto her by legal obligation. A FIP woman can do this. One of the reasons masculists push the idea that women must be FIPs is so that women can afford to raise a kid on their own. One of the many masculist slogans is, quote, "Hey, femalian, if you want to have a kid, you'll have to pay for it yourself." There's a lot to be done in the FIPification, or just FIPPing, of young women. About 3/4 of young women in high schools choose to become fluffy crappers, studying fluffy crap, that is, non-career competent majors, non-math and sciences. In the junior and senior years of high school, they are then excluded at university from studying career competent majors, for example, STEM, S-T-E-M majors, that's science, tech, engineering and math. So that they end up with a fluffy crap diploma that the economy does not value. They will sex about 40 men on average by the time they are in their 30s, then wake up to their biological clock ticking hard and realize that they are too poor to afford their own house. So they will look around for some manslave, their 41st penis, to pay for a house that she and her kids can live in, but the supply of such manslavable men has dried up. Young women need to be socialised by parents, teachers and peers at school to aim to be FIPs, otherwise they'll be punished by men who will treat them as fluffy parasites, harangue them and later in life ignore them. Masculists are a lot more verbally and ideologically aggressive than the passive MGTOWs. Masculists will harangue fluffy feminists for being hypocrites, and since males are more verbally aggressive than females due to their higher testosterone levels, they can harangue and morally pressurize fluffies and fluffy feminists more forcefully than feminists ever harangued men. So guys, treat this flyer as a masculist manifesto. Get informed, get angry, then put enormous moral pressure on women to be FIPs, especially fluffy crappers at high school, where so much of the problem starts. A gender revolution needs to occur for men, so that the divorce courts are made men fair. For example, alimony is scrapped, custody of kids is made joint by default, the para is legislated, legal discriminations against men are removed across the board. Young women at high schools need to be pressured, threatened, to become FIPs or rot on the shelf. Masculist high school students need to spit at young fluffy crapper peers and lecture them against becoming fluffies, pointing out to them that they will be ostracized by society and especially by men, who won't even pump and dump them. So hated are they for wanting to be fluffies as adults. Women need to be educated that it's not enough to be a FIP in practice. They also have to be emo, equal moral obligations in their values. That is, expect to have equal rights with men and equal obligations by becoming FIPs. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Cheers.